Hello, everybody. This is another series in our iSPIRT Public Dialog. So welcome to all of you. Today we are assembled here to talk about iSPIX. I'm Sharad Sharma, one of the co-founders of iSPIRT. With me are Dev and Raghu, who are going to introduce themselves very quickly.
Hi, this is Dev Khare. I'm with LightSpeed India Partner Advisors. We're an early stage venture capital fund, and I'm a volunteer at iSPIRT, and I've worked on the iSPIX index project. Raghu?
Hi, my name is Raghu. I work at the Indian Institute of Science as an entrepreneur in residence in one of the innovation programs here at the campus. And I've been volunteering with iSPIRT for almost more than a year and a half now, and primarily working, assisting. They've been putting up this iSPIX thing, and we'll talk more about it as we get.
Thank you, Raghu.
Yeah.
So iSPIX is one of the initiatives, important initiatives of iSPIRT. As many of you probably know, iSPIRT is a non-profit think tank, and our mission is to make India a product nation. And so the question that we often ask ourselves, are we moving forward in that direction or not? And rather than have just anecdotal information, iSPIX is a way for us to actually put numbers behind the progress of the industry. It's a very innovative way of doing things. And I would request Dev, if you could tell us a little more about what iSPIX really is and shed some light on that. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Sharad. Yeah, iSPIX, was conceived as a way of putting solid numbers and real data around what's happening in this market. And we have essentially gone out and from industry, from analysts, from media, from members of our own team, created a list of 300 to 350 software product companies in India, and then we've sought to quantify what was happening at those companies, specifically trying to cull out the top 30 companies and then track them over time so we can see how this industry evolves. Our view is that this would help steer the conversation around startups and entrepreneurship in India, not just steer, but create a parallel track in addition to the pure consumer-focused companies, create a parallel track about B2B product companies as well, which we think is a burgeoning sector in India. There's a lot going on there, and there's a lot to talk about that this index and this analysis wants to bring to the surface. So that's the goal here, and we've done it now for 2 years in a row. We launched our second report earlier this year in 2015, and we do it every year to track where the market goes. We have got a bunch of really nice companies. We've got internal data from these companies, and we've done a bunch of analysis that we've presented in our report, which is available on Product Nation, the blog. Raghu will talk a little bit more about how this was done and the internals of how it got done. Just as an overview, we have gotten a bunch of confidential numbers from a number of companies. We can't talk about numbers that are specific to a company. We can talk about aggregate numbers when you add up all 30 of the top companies, and that's what we'll do in the report. So Raghu, over to you.
Thanks, Dave. So I'll just go over the brief process which we went through to come up with this iSPIX report. And frankly speaking, there's nothing really glamorous about the entire thing, and it was a meticulous data collection process. And like I know Dave mentioned, we created a list of 300 companies, software product companies in India. And in fact, we started with a much larger number, and then we thought these are the 300 companies that we should watch out, and then we systematically chose top 100 companies that we thought would make it to the top list. And then we went about through a very laborious process of collecting the public data of the company, which is like website and address and CEO and things like that. But the next stage when was the the actual numbers, the valuation numbers of the company, which if it was a public company, which it would be very easy to get. But in our case, most of these Indian software product companies were not public companies and were privately held things. So we had to have go through a very meticulous process through which we had to talk to the the company shareholders or owners or investors, and then share with us the revenues and growth rates of the companies so that we could calculate the net worth of each of those companies. And then from that we shortlisted the top 30, and then the index is essentially the cumulative sum of the value of the top 30 companies. And then we plan to go further every year to get a year-on-year growth of the entire industry, software industry of India. So that's pretty much a broad outline of the process. And then, of course, the challenges that we think the main challenge was the confidential information and getting companies into confidence to share with us this information, which is highly critical and very this thing for a new startup company which is maybe trying to raise funds or is in the early venture series A, series B, or whatever you want to call that. So that's a brief outline of how we did it. And then, of course, towards the end we had a regular compiling of all the data, writing the report, and and the most important part we should come off is the two academic Professor Sharik Hassan of Stanford University and Rishi Krishnan of IIM Bangalore. These are the people who helped us give a complete, thorough theoretical and academic background to the entire exercise we are doing, and they guided us through the process. And of course, Dev was the the glue holding everything together and telling us what to do. And yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, great. Next, maybe I don't know. That's pretty much. Dave, do you want to discuss the report and its points next?
Yeah. So in terms of results, frankly, it was surprising to us in terms of the size or the value of the companies that have been created in India. I think some of the top line results, and then we'll get into details. Some of the top line results, I'll just lay out here a little bit. The top 30 B2B software product companies in India, we estimated to be worth over $10 billion. And that number is up 22% since we did it roughly a year before that. These 30 companies or so, perhaps predictably, were a mix of companies that have been around for the last 15, 20 years and have grown in a sort of more reasonable way over 20 years within the India market or surrounding markets in Asia and Africa and so on. And a mix of newer companies that were started in the last 5 years, more of which as a proportion got venture capital backing and grew with a US or global orientation. So we have a nice mix of both. I'd say that some of the results out there show that, and perhaps predictably, that software companies in India have evolved from being much more services oriented to being much more product oriented from the outset. I think one of the metrics for that is these 18,000 or so people that are employed by these top 30 software companies result in a value of a value per employee of these companies going up from 100K per employee for older companies to much closer to $1 million per employee, which is more in line with what we see in Silicon Valley. It's a very high level, non-actionable metric, but it's an interesting one to sort of track, to sort of see where we are on the services versus product spectrum. And we're clearly moving and are very much in line with product in India now as opposed to services. Some of the other interesting sort of results we saw out there in terms of domicile, We see a bunch of the companies domiciled in India, a majority of them. But there's a fair amount that are domiciled in Singapore and in the US for various reasons. Historically, we also see the older companies were generally bootstrapped to scale, but then the post-2009 companies have mostly been venture-backed, or many of the ones that have grown large have been venture-backed. And that sort of makes sense because that coincides with the timing of the arrival of the venture capital and the startup ecosystem in India in a much bigger way, 2006 onwards. Some of the other things, vertical versus horizontal solutions. As you know, some of the largest software companies in the world are horizontal companies. You think about SAP, or you think about Oracle, or you think about Salesforce in one sense. They're very much horizontal, apply to multiple departments in an enterprise. And then there's the other way of looking at software, which is vertical, which is focused on an industry like in retail or in healthcare. And very much so, we see companies in India moving from a vertical orientation 15, 20 years ago in verticals like retail and banking and so on, to now much more of a horizontal orientation where they can go attack markets globally in multiple sectors. We're seeing that in the area of big data. We're seeing it in the area of CRM. We're seeing it in HR or HCM, security, lots of areas where it's much more horizontal as opposed to verticalized. So that's something that we're seeing. Those are some of the high-level results, I would say. In terms of the actual companies that were on the list, I think it's useful to see which ones they are. Well, let me back up a little bit. I think one other useful one is where these companies headquartered. And I think the prevailing wisdom is that it's all Bangalore-centric, which I think is true. And our results show that a good quarter of the companies are and increasing numbers are headquartered in Bangalore. Interestingly, Delhi had a relatively equal number, but if you look at the trend line, I think it's clear that the trend line is towards Bangalore. Delhi seems to have a lot of the older software companies that have been around for a while. But in terms of new software product company creation, I think that's happening in Bangalore. From an iSPIRT perspective, we've seen a lot of activity in Chennai. There's a fair amount in Bombay as well, and so on. So I think it's spreading out a little bit, but I think the concentration is towards Bangalore for obvious reasons. So I think these are some of the interesting results that we're seeing in the market. In terms of the companies that are represented on the index, let me just read out some of the names that may be interesting. We've got a number of advertising technology companies like Adnear and Comely and Pubmatic, SVG, Vizuri, vServe on the list. And I'm not saying this in any order of market cap or value. I'm just giving the ordering. We've got a number of horizontal software companies. We've got a Zoho there, for example, a Dhruva, Infrasoft, Wooker, Wingify, etc., etc. We've got a number of vertical software companies as well, Ramco, as well as IEX, Indian Energy Exchange, IBS, which is in the travel industry, and so on and so forth. So we've got these three segments, I would say, broadly speaking, in the market. And there's more on the report on the Product Nation website. So that's overall results. The numbers, I mean, it's interesting to see the 22% increase. The way we did that is that it's not the same companies that were on the first index that are on the second index. We had some churn. Some companies either lost value or were acquired. And there were other companies that increased a lot in value and so made it to the list. And so we've got some change. The 22% number refers to the whichever companies were on both lists, the change in value between those two between those two sets of companies. So that number is pretty encouraging, and I think from all indications that number is set to grow again from 2015 to 2016, and more companies will appear. Like Raghu said, there are 300 plus companies on the list. I'm sure there are many more in India, and many are growing really fast and will make it to the list and displace others. So I think that's some of the high level on the results. Editorially, some commentary to add, and I'm sure my colleagues will join in as well. Editorially, it feels like this industry is here to stay. What we hear in the media is a lot about the consumer companies, e-commerce and online to offline, and digital media and those sorts of things, which are very, very valid and important sectors in the market. But if you look at the US market or the China market or the Israel market, other centers of innovation, B2B software has had a big role to play, has resulted in a lot of large venture creation, a lot of value creation, a lot of the IPOs, and so we see that as an important sector here for India to create its own intellectual property. We should have our own companies here, not just rely on IP from elsewhere. I think so. This industry is important, and we can see it moving in the right direction. Some of the areas I think we can comment on, and others can comment on, include where are the founders coming from for a lot of these companies? Where is the financing coming from? Where are the markets that these companies are going after? Are there India-focused software product companies, or are these all focused on the US and other markets? We can talk about that, but I guess all I want to say is that this is an important sector. As a venture investor, we are focused on this area and want to make investments in this area. I know several of our peers in the market are making or have made investments in this area, so I think this is important. I guess the final thing I'll say is that finally, in the last couple of years, we are seeing Indian companies buy Indian software products. It's happening, at least from my vantage point, it's happening with a lot of the newer companies in India, the e-commerce companies, the retail chains that have grown up recently in India, a lot of the new consumer brands. They're buying off-the-shelf software, whether it's for security, whether it's for marketing automation, whether it's for CRM, Salesforce automation, ERP even to some extent. They're buying it from Indian software companies and seeing that Indian software companies have high-quality products that they can offer, that they can buy. It's not just about defaulting to buying from IBM or SAP or Oracle or name your company from the US, right? So we're seeing that, and I think that's a very encouraging development, because Indian companies can now get their initial traction and get closer to product market fit in India itself, and those requirements actually are starting to mirror requirements that companies have elsewhere. So it's not as if you get big in India on some customer base here and then have to change your product to go elsewhere. It's in many cases the same product that can be sold in India and elsewhere, and that gives our companies in India a big leg up in terms of going to market. Sharad, did you have any other comments you wanted to add to this?
Dev, this was a wonderful kind of summary of the results and the analysis that you shared of the data. So it's very, very comprehensive. I'm just wondering, as one of the statements that you made was that as we move forward, you see this B2B sector gain more importance in relative terms compared to what may be happening in the rest of the ecosystem. Do you think 2016 will mark one such year? Where do you because in the last 2 years, of course, there was a huge run-up in valuations of the consumer startups, and I would say specifically metro consumer-focused startups. And now one reads news reports that seems to be slowing down that valuation growth, and some of the some cooling off seems to be happening. Do you feel that would affect these B2B companies, or they are kind of immune from some of those changes, and they would continue to chug along and gain momentum on just the way they did last year?
Yeah, my view, for what it's worth, is that we'll continue to chug along. I don't think there's going to be a year of B2B or anything like that. I mean, I've been investing for over a decade, so we keep hearing about the year of mobile and the year of voice and the year of IoT and this and that. So I never know when it actually arrives. It'll chug along, I think. I don't think there's one big forcing function that's going to suddenly make it pop. But one other sort of comment I'd make here is, valuations and this financing market and all is one sort of way to measure what's going on. But I think if you look at the underlying operational growth of what's going on in the market, I think that continues irrespective of where the financing market is. On the consumer side, smartphones are going to continue to increase. I don't think that's affected at all by what's going on the financing side of the world. We are going to get to 500 million plus smartphone users in India in the next few years. And that actually has a nice knock-on effect in the enterprise in India, because a lot of enterprise technologies in India will be mobile-centric, much more so than in the US or China or elsewhere. Mobile workforce management, mobile workflows of various kinds will continue to be innovated, I think, in India much more so than elsewhere. In terms of financings, I think it'll chug along. There are, 10 to 15 venture capital firms in India, and some subset of them invest in enterprise, and they will continue to do so. Perhaps in a downturn, a few more people start looking at enterprise because it feels like a more predictable sort of path versus consumer, where it just has to catch a consumer's fancy and might get suddenly big, right? But I don't think it's going to be anything dramatically different from last year or the year before. It's just a steady increase.
Raghu, I'm just wondering, I don't know whether you have this at the top of your, easily accessible, but out of these 30, how many roughly would be public companies? You remember?
Raghu, you're on mute. No, yeah. So I think that's a very small number. It's less than 5, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it's not the majority of the companies. Most of it is privately held, or institutionally funded, or bootstrapped. So these are the categories. But it's mostly institutionally funded. Few public companies and few bootstrapped companies. That's how the breakup of the 30 would be.
So Raghu, which ones were the public companies? Perhaps you can just name them.
Ones, I think one is IBS, if I remember correctly.
No, that's not.
No. So I need to look at the data then and tell you.
Ramco was one of them.
Ramco is definitely one of them. Yes.
Yep.
And then no, I just cannot get it off my mind. I need to. Maybe you guys can continue the discussion, and I'll get those things up.
But the question where I was going is, getting 25 private companies to share data with us as a think tank, in a way that, and remember, they of course don't want this data to go out to anybody, is not an easy process. So if there was one anecdote that either of you want to share without naming the company that made it really, really hard to get hold of this data, did you have to promise security by saying that you will, did you have to sign special legal agreements to make it happen, or personal trust was enough, or any anecdote that you can share before we bring this to an end? That would be a good way to close.
I think these things I think are best with Dev and Sharad. You might be the two people who have these things. So I was maybe the data jockey, as I would call it, in the project. So
yeah, I mean, all I'd say there is, and Sharad should definitely add to this, is that for most of these 300 companies, it is a question of just getting somebody who knows somebody there, and most of them were open to sharing. There is sensitivity to some of the larger companies in some of the more active sectors, and also sensitivity from some companies that were perhaps not going to grow as fast as they expected. Or some transaction was happening in their universe, right? But most of the companies were happy to share, and that was really encouraging to see. For some of the companies that were harder, we went to our magic solution, which was Sharad.
No, that's not true. But
and iSPIRT has built up a good sort of good brand with a lot of the companies out there. So they trust it, and they trust the team, and Sharad and Avinash and everybody else has set up good relationships. So I think that really helped.
No, I think we are an oasis of high trust, and that definitely is helping here. But I want to end on this note of a special thanks to Dev, Raghu, Avinash, Rajan, Professor Sharik Hassan, Professor Rishi. I hope I've not forgotten anybody, because I think you completely in a selfless fashion, have created a public good that is completely, I think a year or two from now, we'll wonder how we ever lived without an index like this. So this is such a valuable, public good that has been created that everybody can use and get a deeper understanding of what is happening in the industry. I think that itself is a remarkable story. So very, very big thank you to all the volunteers that made it happen.
Thanks, Sharad, for conceiving the idea, and it's been a great pleasure to work on this.
Yeah, and in fact, for me, this has been such a wonderful experience that I would like to see if I would say that other industry groups also must adopt, something like the index to sort of dimension their sector and things like that. And I feel it's just not the Indian software product industry, but the entire Indian industry by itself should see this as a role, example, and then try to adopt this and into their sector, so that it's good. Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity, and it was wonderful working on this project, and I hope I can continue to work on it as long as I can. So, yeah, great. Thank you, Sharad and Dev.
Everybody.
Nice.
Okay.